The box was sitting on my bed when I came home. Sealed. Taped shut. My name written on top in my mother's handwriting. I hadn't ordered anything. I hadn't asked for anything. And no one in the house would look me in the eye when I walked in. That's when I realized something was very wrong. I should tell you something about the house I grew up in. It was never mine. Not really. I was the youngest of 3. The only one who stayed. My 2 older siblings had left years before, college, jobs, lives of their own, and somewhere in the space they left behind, I became something else. Not a son. Not a person with plans and a future. I became the one who stayed. That meant I cooked. I cleaned. I drove my parents to appointments. I handled the bills when my father's memory started slipping. I managed the grocery runs, the pharmacy pickups, the insurance calls, the contractor visits when the roof started leaking. I did all of it without being asked, because that's what you do when you love people. At least, that's what I told myself. I was 28 years old and I had never lived anywhere else. I had a part-time job that barely paid. I had savings that I kept dipping into for household expenses. And I had a family that smiled at me across the dinner table and called me the responsible one. I thought that was a compliment for a long time. It wasn't. The first crack appeared about 8 months before the box showed up on my bed. My uncle came to visit. He was my father's older brother, someone I'd seen maybe 5 times in my life. He didn't come for a holiday or a birthday. He came alone, on a Tuesday, and he and my mother sat in the kitchen with the door pulled halfway closed for almost 2 hours. I was in the next room. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was folding laundry. I heard my name once. Just once. And then the conversation dropped to a register I couldn't follow. When he left, my mother came out of the kitchen and told me he'd stopped by to check on my father. She said it casually, like she was telling me about the weather. She didn't mention my name. She didn't mention the 2 hours. I didn't ask. But I noticed. 3 weeks later, I was helping my father organize some papers in his office, something I did every few months, just to keep things from piling up, and I found a folder I didn't recognize. It was thin. Just a few pages. I didn't open it. It wasn't labeled, and my father was in the room, so I set it aside and kept working. But later that week, the folder was gone. Not filed. Not moved to another stack. Gone. I mentioned it to my mother, casually, the way you mention a missing pen. She said she didn't know what I was talking about. She said I probably misremembered. I didn't misremember. I have a very specific kind of memory. The kind that notices things. Files them away. Not on purpose. Just automatically. That folder had been pale yellow. It had a small coffee stain on the bottom left corner. And it had been sitting on the right side of my father's desk, under a water bill from the previous month. I hadn't misremembered. She knew that. And I knew that she knew. But I smiled and nodded and said she was probably right. The weeks after that were normal on the surface. Meals. Errands. My father's Tuesday doctor appointments. Grocery runs on Thursdays. But I started noticing smaller things. Phone calls that stopped when I walked into a room. My mother on her laptop late at night, closing it before I could pass. A visit from a man I didn't recognize, who sat with my mother for 40 minutes while I was told, politely, that they needed privacy. I asked who he was after he left. She said he was from the church. He wasn't carrying anything. No pamphlets. No Bible. He had a leather portfolio and a pen, and when he shook my mother's hand on the way out, it wasn't the handshake of someone who just discussed scripture. I let it go. But I filed it. Then the box appeared on my bed. I stood in the doorway of my room and looked at it for a long moment. My name. My mother's handwriting. Taped shut like something being sent away. I picked it up. It wasn't heavy. It rattled faintly when I tilted it. Papers, maybe, or something thin and flat wrapped loosely. I almost opened it right there. But something stopped me. A feeling. The specific kind of quiet that sits in a house when everyone is being careful. I set the box down. I put my jacket back on. I went out for a walk. And while I walked, I thought about the folder. The closed kitchen door. The man with the leather portfolio. My name, said once, in a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. My family had been planning something. Not for me. Around me. I walked for almost an hour. When I came back, I didn't open the box. I put it in my car instead. And that night, I sat at my small desk in my room and I thought about every moment from the past 8 months that had felt slightly wrong. Slightly off. Slightly too carefully arranged. There were more than I'd counted. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that. I was paying attention. Because something had shifted in the way my family moved around me, and I had spent months telling myself I was imagining it, being paranoid, being ungrateful. I was done telling myself that. So I stopped reacting. And I started watching. I opened the box 4 days later. Not at home. At a library, 3 neighborhoods away, at a table in the back corner near the reference section where no one goes on a Wednesday afternoon. I set it on the table. I cut the tape with a small pocket knife I kept on my keychain. And I opened it slowly, the way you open something when you already suspect what's inside but you're still hoping you're wrong. I was not wrong. The box contained 3 things. A letter. A document. And a small USB drive in a paper sleeve. I read the letter first. It was from my mother. Handwritten, 2 pages, the kind of careful handwriting she used when she wanted something to seem thoughtful. The letter said that the family had decided, her word, decided, that it was time to make some long-term arrangements. It said that my father's condition was progressing. It said that the house would eventually need to be transferred. It said that my siblings had been consulted. It said my name twice. Both times in the context of arrangements being made on my behalf. It did not ask me anything. It did not include me in anything. It informed me. The way you inform a piece of furniture that it's being moved to another room. I put the letter down and looked at the document. It took me a moment to understand what I was reading. It was a property transfer agreement. Partial. My family home, the house I had lived in and maintained and paid into for years, was being restructured. Not sold. Restructured. The kind of legal arrangement that shifts ownership quietly, through trusts and beneficiary designations, in ways that don't require a conversation with everyone who lives there. My name was not on it. My siblings' names were. My uncle's name was on it, too, as a witness. The man I'd seen twice in my entire life before he sat in my kitchen for 2 hours on a Tuesday. I sat with that for a moment. Just sat with it. Then I picked up the USB drive. I didn't have a laptop with me. I went to the library's public computer station, signed in with my card, and plugged in the drive. There were 11 files on it. Most were scanned documents. More legal paperwork. A trust amendment. A financial power of attorney that had been updated 6 months ago. Updated, not created. I hadn't been told it was updated. I hadn't been told anything. But the last file was different. It was a video. 41 minutes long. I put in the headphones the library kept at the station. I pressed play. It was a recording of a meeting. Sitting around my family's dining room table, my mother, my 2 siblings, my uncle, and the man with the leather portfolio, who, I could now see clearly, was an estate attorney. The camera angle suggested it was shot from somewhere stationary. A laptop, maybe. Or a tablet propped against something on the sideboard. I don't know if they knew they were being recorded. I don't know who recorded it. I watched all 41 minutes. I'll tell you what was said, calmly, because that's what it deserves. My siblings had not been home in years. My brother visited once at Christmas. My sister sent money occasionally, when she remembered, and called on birthdays. Neither of them had taken a single day off work to sit with my father during his medical appointments. Neither of them had learned which medications he took and in what order. Neither of them knew that he needed his blood pressure checked on Thursdays, that he couldn't eat grapefruit anymore, that he got confused in the evenings and needed someone to sit with him quietly until it passed. I knew all of that. Because I was there. In the recording, my mother explained the plan. The house would be placed in a trust. My siblings would be named as primary beneficiaries. I would receive a monthly stipend, She used that word, stipend, in exchange for continuing to manage the household and care for my father. A stipend. For what I had already been doing for years. For free. Because I loved them. My brother asked how much. My mother named a number that was less than minimum wage when divided across the actual hours I worked in a week. My sister said it seemed fair. My uncle nodded. The attorney wrote something down. I watched my family divide up my future at their dining room table while I wasn't in the room, and I felt something settle in my chest that I can only describe as clarity. Not rage. Not hurt, exactly. Clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop explaining something confusing to yourself and just see it for what it is. I had been useful to them. And useful things don't get consulted. They get managed. The box on my bed wasn't a gift. It wasn't even an explanation. It was notification. The family had made its arrangements, and this was me being informed of my role going forward. I ejected the USB drive. I logged out of the library computer. I put the letter, the document, and the drive back in the box and I tucked it under my arm. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes without starting the engine. I thought about what I could do. I could walk back into that house and put the box on the kitchen table. I could sit down with my mother and tell her I'd seen everything. I could call my siblings. I could raise my voice. I could tell them exactly what I thought of the word stipend and the man with the leather portfolio and the 2 hours in the kitchen with the door pulled halfway shut. I thought about all of that. And then I thought about what would actually happen if I did. The documents would disappear. The attorney would be unreachable. The video file would be explained away or denied. My mother would cry. My siblings would call me ungrateful. My uncle would say nothing. And I would still be in that house, still cooking and driving and managing prescriptions, except now I would be the difficult one. The one who made a scene. Nothing would change. Everything would just be harder. Confronting them would have ruined everything. That night I slept better than I had in months. Not because anything had been fixed. Nothing had been fixed. I was still in the same house, still making the same dinner, still setting the same number of plates on the same table. My father was still sitting in his chair by the window, watching the street the way he did every evening, quiet and distant and smaller than he used to be. Nothing had changed on the surface. But something had changed underneath it. I had stopped being confused. And a person who is no longer confused is a very different thing from a person who is simply patient. The first thing I did was make copies. Not one copy. Not two. I photographed every page of the property transfer document with my phone. I scanned the letter at the library the next morning. I copied every file from the USB drive onto 2 separate drives I bought with cash at a small electronics shop across town. I uploaded everything to a cloud account I created that afternoon using an email address no one in my family knew existed. Then I did something that felt almost too simple. I watched the video again. The full 41 minutes. The second time through, I wasn't processing shock. I was taking notes. I wrote down names. Dates mentioned in conversation. The attorney's first name, which someone used twice, Gerald. The specific language my mother used when she described the stipend arrangement. The moment my brother asked about the number and my sister said it seemed fair. I wrote all of it down in a small notebook I kept in the inside pocket of my jacket from that point forward. 3 days after I found the box, I called a legal aid office in the city. I didn't know much about estate law. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't operating from some position of expertise. I was a 28-year-old who had spent years managing a household instead of building a career, and I was sitting across from a woman named Patricia who specialized in elder law and property disputes and who listened to me for 40 minutes without interrupting once. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you have documentation?" I put my notebook on the table. I put the copy of the property transfer document next to it. I told her about the video. She looked at the document first. She read it carefully, slowly, the way lawyers read things, not for the story but for the specific weight of each word. Then she looked up at me. "This was done without your knowledge?" she asked. "Yes," I said. And you've been the primary caregiver for your father for how long? I told her. She wrote something down. There may be several issues here, she said. With how this trust was structured, with the power of attorney amendment, and potentially with how your contributions to the household have been handled over time. She used the word contributions. Not labor. Not service. Contributions. I had to look at the wall for a second. Patricia referred me to a colleague. A property and estates attorney named Mr. Osei who worked out of a quiet office on the 4th floor of a building downtown. He wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck and he had the specific kind of stillness that comes from spending decades watching people make irreversible decisions in moments of panic. He reviewed everything I brought him. He asked careful questions. He made his own notes. At the end of our first meeting, he explained what he believed could be demonstrated. The property transfer had procedural issues. The power of attorney amendment, depending on the circumstances under which my father had signed it, raised questions about informed consent given the documented progression of his condition. And my years of unpaid caregiving, groceries, transportation, medication management, household maintenance, represented a quantifiable contribution to the household that had never been acknowledged or compensated. Your family made assumptions, he said, settling back in his chair. They assumed you would accept whatever was placed in front of you. He looked at me over his glasses. People who make that assumption usually haven't considered what happens when they're wrong. Back at the house, nothing changed. That was the strange part. The part that required the most discipline. I still cooked dinner. I still drove my father to his Thursday appointment. I still answered my mother's questions about the insurance and the contractors and the grocery list. I still smiled at the right moments and nodded at the right moments and gave no indication whatsoever that anything was different. My mother seemed relaxed. Settled. The kind of relaxed that comes from believing something complicated has been handled. My siblings called more than usual that month. Brief calls, warm in the way that people are warm when they feel they've been generous. My brother asked how Dad was doing. My sister said she was thinking about visiting soon. I said all the right things. I was very good at saying all the right things by then. There was one moment that almost cracked me. About 3 weeks into this, I was sitting with my father in the evening. He was having one of his clearer nights, not fully sharp, but present in a way he sometimes wasn't. We were watching a nature program on television, something about migratory birds, and he turned to me partway through and said, very quietly, "You've always been the one who actually stays." He didn't say it like a compliment exactly. He said it like an observation. The kind of thing a person says when they're seeing something clearly that they haven't put into words before. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. He turned back to the television. I sat with that for the rest of the night. His words weren't about the legal situation. He didn't know about any of it. He was just noticing, in his quiet way, something true. And that was the moment I stopped thinking about what I was doing as revenge. It wasn't revenge. It was documentation. It was protection. It was making sure that what was true could be proven, because the people sitting around that dining room table had bet everything on the idea that truth without proof is the same as silence. 2 weeks later, Mr. Osei called me. He had filed a formal notice with the county register's office flagging the property transfer for review. He had contacted the State Elder Affairs Board regarding the power of attorney amendment. And he had drafted a formal letter to the estate attorney, Gerald, informing him that a third party was now involved and that all communications regarding the estate should be directed through Mr. Osei's office. "Gerald will tell your family today," Mr. Osei said. "Or tomorrow at the latest." I was standing in the parking lot of the pharmacy when he called, holding a bag with my father's medications. "Okay," I said. "Are you prepared for their reaction?" I thought about my mother's careful handwriting on the top of the box. I thought about my sister saying the number seemed fair. I thought about 41 minutes of my future being arranged without me. "Yes," I said. I picked up my father's prescriptions. I drove home. I made dinner. I set the table. I sat down with my family for what I knew would be one of the last ordinary evenings in that house. They were relaxed, comfortable, unbothered. They had no idea that by that morning, 3 separate institutions had received documentation. That a licensed attorney had flagged their arrangements for formal review. That the version of events they had written, the one where I was a useful, manageable presence who would accept a stipend and say thank you, had already been quietly, methodically dismantled. They thought it was just another day. It wasn't. The call came on a Thursday. I know it was Thursday because I had just returned from my father's appointment. I had his blood pressure reading written in the small notebook I kept in my jacket, 128/81, better than last week, and I was making tea in the kitchen when my mother's phone rang on the counter beside her. She looked at the screen. Something changed in her face. Not dramatically. Just a slight tightening around the eyes. The kind of change that happens when a name appears that you weren't expecting and weren't ready for. She took the phone to her room. I finished making the tea. She was in there for 22 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the microwave without meaning to, the way you watch something when your body understands that time matters even if your mind is still pretending to be calm. When she came out, she looked at me the way people look at someone they suddenly aren't sure they recognize. Not angry. Not yet. Uncertain. "Who is Mr. Osei?" she asked. I wrapped both hands around my mug. The tea was still too hot to drink, but I held it anyway, just for something solid to hold. "My attorney," I said. The kitchen went very quiet. She called my brother first. Then my sister. Within an hour, my phone was ringing too, and I let it ring, and then I sent a single message to both of them. "Please direct any questions to Mr. Osei's office. His contact information is below." That was all. No explanation. No apology. No opening for a conversation that would turn into a negotiation that would turn into me being talked out of something true. My sister called 4 times in 20 minutes. My brother sent a long message that used the word ungrateful twice and the word family 7 times. My uncle, I was told later, called my mother and spoke to her for almost an hour. I didn't respond to any of it. I sat with my father in the evening room and we watched the nature program he liked, and outside the house everything was loud and inside the house it was very still, and my father didn't notice any of it because he was watching birds move across a television screen and that was enough for him. It was almost enough for me too. The formal meeting happened 11 days later. Mr. Osei's office. A conference room with a long wooden table and windows that looked out over the street below. My mother sat across from me with her own attorney, not Gerald, someone new, someone she had found quickly and expensively in the days after the call. My brother joined by video call on a laptop set at the far end of the table. My sister had sent a written statement through her own representation. No shouting. No accusations. No raised voices. That was the thing about having documentation. You don't need to raise your voice when you have evidence. The evidence speaks at a volume no one in the room can talk over. Mr. Osei laid everything out methodically. The call came on a Thursday. I know it was Thursday because I had just returned from my father's appointment. I had his blood pressure reading written in the small notebook I kept in my jacket, 128/81, better than last week, and I was making tea in the kitchen when my mother's phone rang on the counter beside her. She looked at the screen. Something changed in her face. Not dramatically. Just a slight tightening around the eyes. The kind of change that happens when a name appears that you weren't expecting and weren't ready for. She took the phone to her room. I finished making the tea. She was in there for 22 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the microwave without meaning to, the way you watch something when your body understands that time matters even if your mind is still pretending to be calm. When she came out, she looked at me the way people look at someone they suddenly aren't sure they recognize. Not angry. Not yet. Uncertain. "Who is Mr. Osei?" she asked. I wrapped both hands around my mug. The tea was still too hot to drink, but I held it anyway, just for something solid to hold. "My attorney," I said. The kitchen went very quiet. She called my brother first. Then my sister. Within an hour, my phone was ringing too, and I let it ring, and then I sent a single message to both of them. "Please direct any questions to Mr. Osei's office. His contact information is below." That was all. No explanation. No apology. No opening for a conversation that would turn into a negotiation that would turn into me being talked out of something true. My sister called 4 times in 20 minutes. My brother sent a long message that used the word ungrateful twice and the word family 7 times. My uncle, I was told later, called my mother and spoke to her for almost an hour. I didn't respond to any of it. I sat with my father in the evening room and we watched the nature program he liked, and outside the house everything was loud and inside the house it was very still, and my father didn't notice any of it because he was watching birds move across a television screen and that was enough for him. It was almost enough for me too. The formal meeting happened 11 days later. Mr. Osei's office. A conference room with a long wooden table and windows that looked out over the street below. My mother sat across from me with her own attorney, not Gerald, someone new, someone she had found quickly and expensively in the days after the call. My brother joined by video call on a laptop set at the far end of the table. My sister had sent a written statement through her own representation. No shouting. No accusations. No raised voices. That was the thing about having documentation. You don't need to raise your voice when you have evidence. The evidence speaks at a volume no one in the room can talk over. Mr. Osei laid everything out methodically. The property transfer had been executed with procedural irregularities that exposed it to a formal legal challenge. The power of attorney amendment, signed during a period when my father's cognitive decline was already documented by his own physician, raised serious questions about capacity and informed consent. And the matter of my unpaid contributions to the household, 7 years of caregiving, transportation, financial management, and physical maintenance, all of it uncompensated, represented a claim that had been carefully documented and could be formally pursued. He placed a folder in front of my mother's attorney. "We're not here to litigate today," Mr. Osei said. "We're here to discuss a resolution that reflects the actual history of this household." My mother looked at the folder. Then she looked at me. I looked back at her quietly. I wasn't performing calm. I actually was calm. Because everything I needed to say had already been said, in documents and timestamps and a 41-minute video that none of them had known I'd seen until it was too late to make it disappear. The resolution took 3 weeks to finalize. I won't give you every detail because some of it is still private and some of it belongs to people who aren't me to share. But I'll tell you the shape of it. The property transfer was restructured. My name was added. Not as an afterthought. As a primary party, reflecting the years I had contributed to the household and the documented role I had played in maintaining it. A formal caregiver agreement was drawn up for the ongoing care of my father, one that acknowledged what the work actually was, what it actually cost, and what it actually deserved. Not a stipend. A proper arrangement, documented and legally binding. My siblings signed. Not happily. Not without their attorneys pushing back on 3 separate clauses. But they signed. My uncle sent a message through my mother that he wanted to speak with me. I didn't respond. There was nothing he could say that I needed to hear, and no version of that conversation that would end with anything useful. Some doors close not in anger but simply because there is nothing worth walking back through. Gerald, the estate attorney, withdrew from any further involvement with my family's affairs. I was told this was his decision. I believed it. My mother and I didn't speak directly for almost 2 weeks after the meeting. When we did, it wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't an apology either, not really. It was a conversation at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning, just the 2 of us, with coffee and the particular kind of silence that lives between people who know too much about each other to pretend anymore. She said she thought she was protecting the family. I told her I understood that. I did understand it, in a way. People who do quiet damage to the people closest to them almost never think of themselves as doing damage. They think they are being practical. Realistic. They think they are making arrangements. They don't consider that making arrangements around a person, without that person, is one of the most precise ways to tell someone that they don't quite count. I didn't say all of that to her. There was no point. I just said I understood. And I meant it. And I meant it the way you mean something when you've already moved past needing anyone to admit they were wrong. I started looking at apartments the following month. Small ones. Just enough space for my things and a desk and a window with decent light. I wasn't leaving out of anger. I was leaving because I had stayed out of necessity for so long that I had almost forgotten staying could be a choice. Now I had choices. That was new. That was the thing the legal process had given me that no apology ever could. Not justice in the dramatic sense. No courtroom, no verdict, no moment where someone was publicly humiliated and I stood tall in the clean light of vindication. Just options. Just the quiet, solid weight of having protected myself. Of having paid attention when it mattered, moved carefully when it counted, and trusted evidence over emotion when everything in me wanted to just put the box on the kitchen table and let the argument happen. The argument would have been loud. This was better. I found an apartment 6 weeks later. 2nd floor. A window in the kitchen that caught the morning light in a way that made even instant coffee feel like something worth sitting down for. The day I moved my last box out, my father was in his chair by the window the way he always was. I stopped in the doorway on my way out and looked at him for a moment. He turned and looked at me. "You'll visit," he said. It wasn't a question. "Every Thursday," I said. "Same as always." He nodded. He turned back to the window. I carried the last box to my car. I drove to my apartment. I put the box down in the middle of the empty living room and I stood there in the quiet for a long moment, just letting it be quiet. No phone calls to manage. No conversations happening behind closed doors. No sealed boxes appearing on my bed with someone else's plans inside them. Just my space. My silence. My name on a lease I had signed myself, for a life I had chosen, with no arrangements made around me by people who had decided I didn't need to be in the room. I made tea. I sat by the window. I watched the street below for a while, the way my father watched his street, and I thought about how strange and specific and hard-won ordinary peace can feel when you've spent years living without it. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I just felt like myself. Quietly, solidly, finally like myself. That night, everything was quiet.